Welcome, Stacia. It's so wonderful to have you here, actually. And you and I were just about going deep into some of the stories. So
Mm.
let's start with that. I mean, this is audacious conversation. So we talk about courage, care, nonconformity. But I'd love to start with what is your story, Stacia?
Oh, thank you so much, Alina, for having me. And it's such an audacious just opportunity for me to share this because one of the things that's been a theme in my work as an embodied speaking and story coach is I come from being a traditional teller for the last 40 years.
Mhm.
And I started storytelling as part of as an actor. I was a trained actor, and before that, I was a dancer. And I was brought in to enliven a children's museum exhibition of Dr. Seuss, which
Mm.
I learned to read with Dr. Seuss. So I was like, "Oh, you've got to hire me," and they did, of course. And I became this like human busy box, bringing the exhibit off the walls. So then they had things on the curriculum, these teachers and school groups and things that came through called like multiculturalism and differentiated learning. And it's like, well, how do you teach that? So that's how I kind of got my start as a storyteller. I went into these places and enlivened curriculum and continued to gamify and do that. And I think that's kind of the one of the audacious things about me that sets me apart from um, anyone else in my family. I like go and just do stuff, and I continue to pursue things like out of, very audaciously, very kind of irreverently. Um, in that story of the little girl with the red shoes, if you remember the beginning of that story, she had lost her mother and father, and she made her shoes out of these scraps of red stuff that she found herself, and she made her own pair of shoes from scratch. And that's how I've made my whole self. I've made myself from scratch, basically. And so I long story. I started telling for all these places, and then I was part of the artist in residence program.
Mm.
And it was a bit of like a trade fair for the artists and the people that hire artists because it was a matching fund thing. So this school that was hiring me as a drama practitioner and storyteller, they were hiring this other young man from Ghana, Wandi Pei, as a textile expert and a talking drums person. And so I was introduced to him as a storyteller, which now I feel like how arrogant of me to be calling I am a storyteller. And he was like, so who do you tell for? And I'm like, oh, well, I tell for like schools and the zoo and the libraries. And he goes, no, 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 no. Who? Whose stories do you carry? Who do
Mm.
you for? And I'm like, well, uh. And he said, I am from Ghana. My mother is a griot. She carries the genome of our culture in her. We treat her like an egg. And when we forget who we are, we go to her and she reminds us of who we are. We carry those stories. And it really was a big, huge awakening for me that the responsibility that I had in sharing these stories, that I shared them with reverence and knowledge and permission.
Mm.
So many people's stories are appropriated, and cultures are, appropriated, and there's just no acknowledgement of where these things came from and who they are. I mean, quite popularly, the Joseph Campbell hero quest thing. I mean, that hero quest story has almost is you can see it playing out in our cultures. It's ruined things. People pursue, the end game at all costs. The hero, he comes and he conquers and he takes and it's not real leadership when you start then listening, because the other half of storytelling is listening to indigenous storytellers and people from other cultures, or people that have had experiences, and you just hold space
Mm.
and allow them to just empty their bucket and express and share and go into themselves, which is why this is an embodied practice, and find that wellspring of wisdom that it is in all of us, but allow it, pathways to come out. Not only does that person get to hear their own wisdom, but you get to hear things that you never would have thought up or imagined. So I continue to evolve and learn so much with this practice, both as a coach, and an embodied somatic coach,
Mm.
and as a teller myself, and that's one of the things that I'm doing at the moment with my practices. I have a podcast, Finding My Voice, and I'm like, I think I need to start finding my voice.
Well, hopefully you can do, I mean, absolutely, you do need to. And I love that you share that story, Stacia, because that's what I know you for. And of course, I mean, I know you as being an audacious spirit. That's why you're here with me. But also, you have got so many stories. And I've just noticed it right now. You're talking about the heroes. It's like, I don't know that story, Stacia, because you have so many of those stories to yours. And you sort of go, it's like, yeah, but I don't know it. And I think that's one of the audacious things about you. You are full of those stories, and yet, the story that you shared with the mentor from Ghana is, who is that story for? It's amazing insight.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, when we choose a story, because one of the things I work with clients with is like, you have all these stories, but you have all these messages, and it's like finding the right story for the right audience, finding the right story.
Mm.
Because we do have all these things that have just happened to us, things that have happened a long time ago, things that haven't happened yet, which are interesting stories. You can write that story out. But is really finding what is the right story here. What's the purpose of that story? So if you look, maybe if we were to make a wheel around, all of those stories that I shared when I was beginning were based on content.
Mhm.
Your content creators. So it's like, okay, we need to talk about X, Y, or Z. So let's glean all that we can and make a program about that, or make some copy that has to do with that. But then there's also the audience, and it's like, what does your audience need to hear? What does your audience need to hear that really, that they've come for?
Mhm.
And then you have to look at, then again, cultural. Should I be telling this story? Am I the right person? Is this the right story? Am I telling it right? So there's all these things to consider. And you're right. You forget, because this is the thing about wisdom. We all sit on this mountain of so much experience, but when you sit on top of the mountain, you don't see the mountain. So you just look at the view.
Totally. And I love this idea of the circular. Yeah, as because you and I talked about my book also on your podcast, The Finding Your Voice. It is circular. When I started writing that book, The Audacious Spectrum, I thought about the spectrum as a linear spectrum, which is
Yes.
probably what most people do think. And then coming out to the conclusion that it's a circular spectrum, because we just keep going around. And it's acknowledging. That was one of my very first chapters, acknowledging where we are, acknowledging the reality, acknowledging the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you said. But I'm curious. I mean, again, sort of Michael joined us, and he said he loved it. I suppose it's just the beginning of you going deep into the stories. What is, in your experience, and in this, using one of the pillars of audacity, courage, care, and non-conformity, just pick one, and let's just go into with one of your stories.
Well, I think courage is a huge for me, because especially in the space of speaking and coaching people to be speakers, most people and coaches in the space are selling confidence, and people are confident, and that's their outcome, is confidence. And confidence is such an outward measure. It's other people perceiving that you are confident. But inside, most people that are confident actually have very low self-esteem, and this is something that they use to kind of cover that. And it's actually more about courage,
Mm-hmm.
and that gets you to a point where you are authentically going forward and taking that risk and being audacious and sharing something. Now, people don't want to hear like the warts and all. They don't want the blood, guts, and gore. What people really want to know from your story is what experience taught you, what you wish someone would have told you. And they also want to know how you were able to overcome resistance and when things didn't go your way. So adversity is the A word I'm looking for there.
Yes.
Adversity. In the face of adversity, what do you do? And I think as a kid, my favorite stories were always biographies because I really wanted to know how people did their life.
Hmm.
and and it was fascinating to me, and that's why your book is so important and timely, because most people that have accomplished incredible things, it was like in that moment, it was just something in a moment. And you had somebody on earlier that was about that click. It happens in a click, it happens in a minute. And I remember a woman, her name is Sabrina Cohen Hatton, and she is one of our top firefighters in the UK, a woman. And she wrote a book that she thought would just be this nothing, PhD thesis on how people under pressure make decisions.
Hmm.
Called it In the Heat of the Moment. And so she came up with this little checklist of people, how, what they, things to look through and look for, because much of what we do, unless we're going to be consciously audacious, is based on confirmational bias. We just do what we've always done because it's safe. But to have courage and to go, wait a minute, what's really happening here? What can I do to move it forward? Because they have to make some incredible decisions, like get their people out of there, even though they know there might be other people in a burning building.
Hmm.
Who do we triage first? Who do we send in to do these things? And interestingly, speaking of personal story, as she was writing this book, she started to tell her story for the first time. One that she never told anyone else was that she was a homeless teenager.
Wow.
She slept rough for 2 years on the street, and getting a job with the fire service in Wales. There was like 1% of women in the field at the time. She was the one. and and the kind of stuff that she had to put up with from the boys and all of that. But how she got that spider sense, that sense of that heightened awareness, was from sleeping on the streets, and why she was there. So she told the story, her own personal story, that, and she never thought she was, felt shame about it.
Mm.
But actually, it's a story of, huge courage and huge resilience,
Resilient.
and the fact that, you are the maker of your own life, no matter what is happening to you. What is happening? The path is made for walking on. So you literally can lay down those slabs as you stand on them. And it's just your choice.
Yes, and actually, what it's coming is so many insights that my head is exploding just even listening to you, Stacia. Because one, I mean, I don't have a pod. This is not a podcast format, so I don't have the podcast notes. But I would love for you. Maybe we'll mention it in some of the messages when we finish of Sabrina's book, because it sounds fascinating. She definitely sounds like an audacious person. And I also have a very dear friend, Shannon, an ex-firefighter in the US, not UK, and I'm sure that that would be a fascinating story. And it is about how we respond. The other thing you mentioned is that the click moments, which is Franz Johansson book, which is actually called The Click Moment, which I finished recently, and I even wrote my latest newsletter on LinkedIn. The February newsletter is on that. It's like all of these things that feel or seem random, they rarely are actually. And but you have to be more wise in as much as what is the lesson that's been given to me, in what seems like such a random moment. And absolutely, as you and I were talking just before we started about this responsibility, which I touch about in my book, which is the response ability.
Yes, yeah, and I firmly believe in that and have mentioned that to my children, both of them, especially my son, who is like yours. He's on the autistic spectrum, and it's like responsibility is your ability to respond.
Mhm.
Oh, that's what it is. It's not like taking on the weight of the world and all of that. It isn't. It's your ability to respond. And you lay it out so lovely in your book about, there's yes and there's no. And you really need to feel into that energy of it, because that ability to respond is what gives us our agency.
Mhm.
When you feel like you have no rights at all, certainly people that have been in really dire situations of entrapment and incarceration and or illness, or limited by whatever ability, they still have choice. And so it's what choices that you are going to, what's your ability to respond to your situation and to choose. There's a very famous story going back to traditional tales called The Firebird. And in this story, there's this talking horse, of course. And and your story starts when your life blows up,
Mhm. Mhm.
not because it's smooth. And it's the I think the catchword for all stories is don't. Don't open the door, don't pick up the feather, don't drink the potion, don't. But of course they do. And if they didn't, there would be no story. So this guy picks up the feather of the Firebird, and it just starts this cavalcade of stuff. But his horse tells him not to do it. Every time that he does it and gets in deeper over his head, he cries to the horse, "Oh, what am I going to do?" And the horse says, "Save your tears. Now's not the time for crying. Now's the time for doing. This is what you need to do." So it goes on to the end of the story, and finally it's his death, and he's, going to meet his death. And he goes, "What should I do?" He goes, "You can cry now, because this is it." But you still have a choice. You can go kicking and screaming and lamenting, or you can run at it full on and embrace it. And that's what he does. And he runs full in, and he jumps into the boiling pot of oil. Golden. Incredible. And certainly that fun factor, which
Mm.
Jorgensen talks about, he's a climber. He's the one of the pair that climbed the Dawn Wall originally in 2014. And he got onto pitch 15, and it took him a week. He couldn't do it. And it's just like, what he had to wait for the skin to grow back in his fingers. It was like that.
Mm.
But when he finally did it, then he did 3 more that day. And so leadership coaches are like, oh, so what was your mindset like? And he's like, well, it wasn't a mindset. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was thinking about survival. He said, but I measure everything on the fun factor, and that goes expect, embrace, and enjoy. So it's just knowing what to expect.
Mm.
Comes from just going, okay, what's going to happen here? Knowing as much as you can. Sabrina Cohen Hatton talks about that too. That checklist, and it's a simple one, just like you have in your book. This,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then embrace it. Like it's going to happen. So resistance is futile. Just go, it's happening. It's hurting. It's this, it's that. And then love it. Love it.
Mm.
I mean, being on the side of a mountain, come on. That's incredible. You got to love it. Or for me, like with open water swimming, I know every time it's going to be cold. I know it's going to take my breath away, but I embrace it. And I go, here I am in February in a lake. There's a swan. My God, this is my best life.
I love it. And actually, I wrote it down, Stacia. Is the sort of expect, embrace, and then love it. Because sometimes, we talk about uncertainty and how we respond, our responsibility is sometimes we expect one thing and then we're given something else.
Absolutely.
And that is where the magic, in a way, sort of happens, because it's like, I thought this was going to happen, but actually is this. And this is where the embracing comes.
Yeah.
Can we embrace what's been given to us? And to you, the choice, I really truly believe in the choice. I sometimes make this provocative statement that's the only thing we ever have on this earth as we come is choice. And sometimes it doesn't seem like it doesn't look like it, but it is. It's how do we respond. And we had a lot of those stories from the Holocaust stories. One of my most favorite authors, she wrote the book called The Choice and also The Gift, Edith Edgar. And then it's amazing, because in those type of circumstances, it really does feel like there's absolutely no choice whatsoever we've been put in. And yet, even in those horrific circumstances, there is a choice as to how we behave, how we think.
Yeah. I mean, when people came out of those situations, whether it was the camps or other genocidal situations, they were either the making of you or the breaking of you. And when people accepted, acknowledge, and you have acknowledge as one of your things, and include, and then go, right, this is it. This is happening for me. What am I learning? And instead of this is happening to me, and then this victim idea, and I just, I find it always incredible that sometimes it's just the smallest things, but committed and consistent that we do. I'm in a group, work with a group right now called with Story Commons. We're a story and we're doing weaving and spinning stories. And we are weaving within these traditional tales stories of real women weavers and spinners who used it as an act of resistance and resilience against mining companies and development places to save their land and hang on to what they know to be true. And I think the one thing to remember in stories, whether it's your story or a traditional tale or a video game, which a lot of our new stories are being created actually. And I do voices in video games and love that culture. So there are no bad or good choices. You cannot make a bad choice and you cannot make a good choice. There's only this or that. And if you do this, then there's all that that's going to come next. And if you do this, if you do that, then you get that. It's just a different menu that comes up, and it's true in life too. And you always there's always another choice to make. There's always another choice to make.
And I think, you might not remember from the book, I always say, because I sometimes work with this sort of binary, there's a black and a white choice. And then for me, I always ask my clients or my friends or my family, what is your favorite color, Stacia? So I'm going to ask you live. What is your favorite color?
Well, green.
Green. So, I would ask you, okay, so, we always have the choice of I do nothing or, I do the complete opposite. I sort of jump. What is the green choice?
I love it. Green for me is going to always be some nurturing or joy. It's like we talked about, you have your word for the year, which is easeful, finding that ease, that path of ease. As someone who's like embattled and doing like, what's the hardest thing I can do all the time? It's like, now let's make some different choices. And for me, I've picked an inner word and an outer word this year. And my inner word is nourish. And what to nurture and nourish myself. So nurture is one of the big things. So my other color that I love is purple, and that is about commitment and sovereignty. But even sovereignty just means that you are unassailable, in that you are beyond compare. You actually have control and agency, and that is true. It's not just all the power, it's that ability to respond and that responsibility of having that. I mean, Timothy Snyder talks about this, especially in the current geopolitical situation. There's so many people, they want freedom from this, freedom from that. But actually, true freedom is the freedom to.
And I love that, because you mentioned the word sovereignty, which is for me, the sovereignty is actually the choice. What sovereignty means to me is I am really standing in my choice. And I own that choice, whether, again, the good and the bad choice for me. And I suppose it's in the way that I'm also wired, is I always say to my clients and my friends, you make a choice. It doesn't have to be whether it's black, white, or the green. Make it, and then you will find out, because you can always Oh, I haven't lost you. I thought, we had so many of these stories where people were just sort of dropping off the restream, but you're still with me. But yeah, so it's like, whatever choice you make, you can always change that.
Yeah.
I don't think they're irreplaceable, irremovable choices. Maybe sometimes, but at least you will know. Rather than not making a choice, you will stay in that no man's land, as I call it.
Yeah. That camping at the crossroads.
That's right. And actually, Gary just said, like sports, the only guaranteed bad shot is the one not attempted. Choice, so choose. Absolutely.
Yes, you got to move, you got to go, you got to do. You make a choice, because no choice at all is exactly, it's giving your choice to somebody else, But then there are choices where you but this is a choice, then a choice to step back. Certainly, I love how Abby Wambach, she was the captain of U.S. women's soccer team for many years, and such
the Wolf Pack. I mean, that's another wonderful small book that she wrote.
Yeah, the Wolf Pack, and talks about leading from everywhere, and she talks failure is fuel, and I love that she talks about either you're pointing or you're cheering, because either you're cheering the person who like made the goal, or you are pointing at everybody who is responsible for like setting it up, coaching you, cheering you on, watching your back, and all, it doesn't ever happen by yourself. And it's, you make a choice and it's this or that, it's never good or bad, but there's always the next choice and the next choice, because it leads you to the next way along. You can find your way to loop back around, or you can cut right through it. There's so many ways and patterns to make. And that's why people are, hardwired for story, because story is nothing more than a pattern. It's pattern making. And it's what we do to make sense of our world. We create that pattern, just like Wandi Hay talks about, in his culture. There is a pattern, there is a traditional way to do things. And it's never about what that story means, because it means something different every time you tell it. And it means something different to every member of that audience. Where do you find yourself in that story? Where are you? Who are you in that story? You could be part of the liminal world. You could be protagonist, you don't know. And what is it that is speaking to you right now? That's what it means. I'm not there to interpret. I'm just the carrier. I'm just the porter that brings in the bags, You got to
the giver. No, absolutely. And I just wanted to acknowledge what Leo just said on the chat, that sometimes you can wait, similar to listening rather than speaking. Yes, and that's another choice. The waiting, as long as that's an intentional choice. I'm making the deliberate choice to wait, deliberate choice to listen.
I spoke to somebody about this, another client. We were using gardening metaphors. And we talked about the idea of fallowness, letting it lay fallow and taking rest, constantly, receding and growing and yeah, there is and there's also the practice of, well, this would probably fall under no, but of pruning and thinning. And in Kew Gardens, they have a potting bench. And so once all these seedlings come, they have a practice of called pricking out and potting on, pricking out and potting on.
And, you as a nurturer, it's interesting that you actually mentioned this, and I'm aware of time. So, even finishing up, but the pruning, because anything that you nurture, you plant, you water, and then you have to prune. And that's the thing that's most uncomfortable for me, because that means you need to let go of something.
I know. I mean, and in a very real sense, I had a tomato plant. It grew amazing, great guns, no tomatoes. And so we're going to have to prune it back. And I was like, it killed me to do it, but I did cut it back. And I mean, within a week, tomatoes.
And that's such a leadership, to me, lesson as well, that we really have to, if we want to keep nurturing, we will also have to at times prune the teams. That's just part of it. But I'm sort of, we almost at the end. I'd love to, I suppose, where do, with your wonderful genius of telling stories and getting people to tell their own stories, where can they find you, Stacia?
Come to my website. It's where most of my stuff lives. It's staciakeogh.co.uk. And I post on LinkedIn, and I have a podcast called Finding My Voice, which you are on and many other people are on. It's season 3 is now complete, and I'm moving into season 4, which is going to be about storytelling.
Fabulous. And actually, the other thing as well, for me, this has been an audacious experiment, this LinkedIn Lives, which now, I enjoyed them thoroughly last year, but they are now also on YouTube. So this particular discussion will be probably just uploaded in about a week or so. So people can also listen to this and others. But it was such a pleasure and delight to have you here.
Much. I've enjoyed myself thoroughly. I really appreciate you allowing me to find my voice.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's been here and been really engaging. So, I think taking that away, expect, embrace, and just love it. So thank you. And then see you soon. Thank you, everybody.